That's what they tell me. It doesn't seem that long, but, at my age, nothing seems that long anymore. And it's like the end of the toilet paper roll. It's closer to the end, the faster it goes,
Is that a motivating factor in producing more stuff?
I think in a way, yeah. I'm hoping to do more records in the next couple of years, although I always say that, and whether I really get around to getting them finished is always another argument. But we've always been a pretty active touring band, live band. We've, playing live gigs throughout the year has been a big part of our yearly things. And it still gets in the way, just as it always did when we were even younger. The Doobies, we were always finishing the next record in destinations far flung from L.A., just to get it done, because we were always on the road. In fact, we did some of Minute by Minute in Muscle Shoals, the old famed studios years ago, just to get the record done. I still run into that problem with touring. Make a point that when I am home to make that a priority.
That must have helped your work ethic then, if you were able to squeeze it in between
Seemingly
shows.
Not so much, no. But it should have. But it's always that tricky part, because life, is in session all the time, and now the kids are grown and stuff, so it's a lot easier for me to get to my business and stuff than it used to be when they were little.
Do you have a notebook? Do you carry around notes for?
My wife buys them for me like every 6 months, and I lose them within a day or two. I've always had trouble doing that because I've always, unfortunately, I've always had people who would remind me what I have to do next, the record company or the management or whoever. When you don't really have to do that stuff like balance your own checkbook, you'd be amazed at how quickly you forget how to do it.
So somebody like, hey, Michael, it's been 17 years. It's probably time to put another record out.
Unfortunately, in those areas, it can get away from everyone, and not just me, But I'm like, I've already started another project that I'm hoping. But then, I cut one thing, and my friend who I'm doing it with is already going, are we ever going to go back in the studio again and do another track? And so I'm just kind of finding myself succumbing to sloth and procrastination again.
Now that it's out there in the world, and it seems like people have been largely reacting pretty positively to it, that must be a motivating factor to get out there.
It most definitely is, and it was a kind of record that was more in keeping with records I have done in the past, although maybe different material-wise, but still with a full band and live tracking dates and stuff like that, and or building tracks from demos, the way we used to do. There are a couple other kinds of projects I'd like to do, where I maybe just real bare bones, maybe just bass and piano, and one or two significant cameos of other instruments like
more
guitar.
Sort of live in studio.
Yeah, but really very, very little sonic information or harmonic information other than voice, bass, maybe a little bit of drums, percussion even, but just to try to do a record that's really, in some cases, maybe just a trio, so as to experiment with that kind of tracking production, where there's very little to mix in the end.
And obviously, the expression of doing a record of originals is different than doing covers, of which you've done many. It's a little rawer. You're putting yourself out there. Is it more difficult the further away you get from the last project?
Yes. Yeah, it was, I was lucky in a way that I had I'm always making demos of song ideas. So what this record consists of largely enough is demos I had made while I was doing the Motown projects. I'd get an idea for a song and I didn't want to forget it, so I would jump in my studio in the wee hours, and the guy that I was co-oping with on that space, he was the drummer engineer, and we had combined a lot of our old gear. We're both kind of analog gear fanatics and kind of more of a warehouse than a studio, but we set up enough of a system that we could record, and it's a big room, so we can get a pretty good sound in there, He would work in there a lot. He's a producer and a great drummer. He had all these files that we had done of these demos, and when he moved into a different space, he had all that stuff with him, and he used some of those demos we made to tune his new room to his drums, So he set up his drums out in the room, try to find the right spot and the right miking situation. And so he used those demos just to have something to play to, So by the time I came back and I went out to see his new studio, he said, man, I got to tell you, I've been using those files that we had of your demos, to just kind of set up my drums and stuff. And he goes, I think some of that stuff I think you got to start of a new record here, So we listened to it, and just the drums that he had replaced, in the new room with better recording sounds and everything. Because the stuff we did as demos was just quickie. But so he really took the time to find the right drum sound and stuff. All of a sudden, the stuff already sounded better to me, And I thought, well, maybe we can work with these tracks, because we liked the vocals. The vocals were kind of matter of fact. I hate singing in the studio, especially when I know I'm singing a master track. typically I'll listen to the demo and wish I could have sang it like I did on the demo, which when I really wasn't thinking too much about it being the last vocal I'll ever do on this. It's kind of like golf. If you really are in a tournament, you start swinging way too hard if you're not careful, and you start playing a different game than you do when you're relaxed. I didn't want to lose those vocals, so some of those tracks, not all of them, but we just rebuilt the tracks around that original vocal.
You get caught up in a trap if you become too much of a perfectionist in the studio, especially now with Pro Tools and all of these things at your disposal.
And in the studio, I found that the more technology we get, the more different ways we can confuse the hell out of ourselves, and bogged down with that pursuit of perfection. It's like editing, even tuning. If you do that on something, what is the right perfect pitch? No one really knows. It's
you need someone nudging you out the door a little bit.
Yeah, you do. I think we started off with that pursuit, thinking that we were going the right direction with that and not changing the original vocals because they just felt good. The phrasing felt right. So we thought, well, if we play to that vocal, we'll always keep the track in that groove. In some cases we did, some cases we didn't do so well. It was something to shoot at that kept the feel of that track. And, all the way going back to the 60s when I started recording, it seems like you were always chasing the demo, always trying to get that certain magic that the demo had. Even though it was a terrible recording, there was something about the performance a lot of times. The problem with that is you can't. You just have to let it go and let it be what it is now. I wish, many cases, like when we play some of the songs we've been playing for years, I wish I had the chance to sing them for years before we had ever cut the tracks, because you change everything. You change the melody, you change the cadence, you change the tempo to something typically better, I think, over the years. And then you always wish, shoot, I wish I had sung this melody on the record.
One of the primary differences of starting with the foundation of a song like a Marvin Gaye song or a Stevie Wonder song is that that's a fantastic piece of art, right? You have that core. It's an entirely different experience when you're just building something from scratch and putting it out into the world.
Yeah, it is. And it's a kind of like you say, it's kind of fun in that because you already know you're starting. Nobody's going to say, oh, I don't know if it's a single, because it was a gigantic hit already.
Because it's one of the best songs ever.
Yeah. One of the longest running radio tunes ever. Yeah. So, you don't have that worry that you do with original stuff. But also, all you have to worry about is not lousing it up too much, and hopefully bringing something to it that's a little different, but gives it shines a different light on the song. But you already know the song is great, so you don't have that worry,
Was there a fear early on when you did start doing the Motown covers? And obviously, the first time people listen to it, they're going to be comparing it to one of the great performances of all time.
No, yeah. I had a twofold worry there because when they asked me to do it, I remember in my head and my voice in my head saying, just say yes. Don't get into a big discussion about it.
So this was somebody else's suggestion?
Yeah, it was Universal UK, guys from the UK. They owned all the masters. So their original idea was for me to sing on the original masters, which I was never going to do.
To sing over the Funk Brothers tracks?
Yeah, and as much as I would have enjoyed doing that in my spare time in private, I would never release a record. I already knew that was not going to happen, but I didn't want to. I just said, look, we can explore this. And at the same time, in my head, I was going, why are they asking me, of all people? Because there's a million young, new artists who are much more contemporary. Shouldn't it be a young black artist? What made me say yes more than anything else was I thought to myself, I have sung these songs for 50 years in every nightclub I ever played. And I learned a certain affinity with the songs that is my own. But it's usually me trying to emulate the old vocal. So I thought, well, I at least have that to bring to it. I've learned to sing these songs in the trenches, in nightclubs growing up. Maybe that's worth something. It just seemed like such a great opportunity. I as much as I had doubts about it, I didn't want to say no. And then in the course of discussing how we were going to go about it, I said, look, I don't think we should touch the original masters at all. Those are relegated to history. They should always be by those artists.
Let's green screen me into Citizen Kane.
No, right, exactly. And, there had been so many sampling things and done with hip-hop, and I don't want to do a hip-hop Motown record. People aren't going to cross the street to hear me do, contemporary hip-hop stuff. I don't want to go in with, like, the hottest new hip-hop producer and do this record.
After the Warren G record came out, was there interest?
There's a lot of great young producers out there that they're in that genre, who I love. I love what they do. But I didn't want to do that to Motown. I said, the idea that I have in my head is, and it was all about compromise at that point, I'd like to do all the very cool, obscure Motown tracks, the B-sides that people remember, but they haven't heard in a million years. You get that feeling when you hear the song, you go, oh my gosh. Like Since I Lost My Baby, or songs that they were big hits, but maybe not the Heard It Through the Grapevine, Reach Out, I'll Be There. Those songs that people will hear and go, oh, wow, I love that song. I haven't heard it forever. The record company didn't like that idea. They wanted me to do Grapevine. So I compromised. For every Grapevine, we did a Lovin' You Is Sweeter. We got to rearrange with something like one of the Supremes tracks.
Do you feel that you've got maybe a little more liberty if it's not as huge of a hit?
Yeah, you do. And also, we did some of the even really big hits. We just kind of went song by song. Sometimes it just seemed really appropriate to kind of recreate in some way the original record, like when we did For Once in My Life. You're never going to do a better version than Stevie's version of that song. So we just kind of did our best to recreate that feeling. Simon Climby was the big, real winning ingredient in the whole thing. He had produced the Pilgrim album with Eric Clapton, and I just loved that record. I thought that's such a classically soulful, and yet it had that kind of ethereal British sheen or to it. That it's kind of like when the Beatles first came out and they did You Really Got a Hold on Me. I think there was just something different about the way they did them as opposed to the American acts who already had big hits with them. There was some kind of English twist to it, that we all responded to, growing up. So I thought, if we're going to do the Motown stuff, it would be fun to do it with this producer who's going to bring that kind of ethereal quality to these very recognizable songs. Hopefully we'll come up with some cool arrangements. And his team of guys came up with some great tracks. I participated in some of the pre-production on the first two, but for the most part, those guys did the tracks. I just had to worry about singing them in the keys of the original record for the most part, because we kind of made up a pact that we wouldn't lower the keys if we didn't have to. Some of them we absolutely had to, but for the most part, we did them all in the original keys just to kind of keep the spirit of that record.
Even after you had been recording for a number of decades and had a number of big hits at the time, there was still a sense of self-doubt that maybe you couldn't really replicate it, or maybe, you didn't necessarily deserve to be up there with a Stevie or a Marvin Gaye.
I wanted to make sure that I created an environment for myself with a producer and musicians and the approach to the songs that would allow me to be sincere, that I wouldn't find myself in a strange situation trying to be something I'm not to facilitate some kind of a concept for the record that I didn't like.
You don't want to be the Pat Boone to an Elvis song.
Right. I didn't want to be trying to be something I wasn't just to do this gig. I wanted to make sure it was something I felt sincere in when I got up to the microphone to sing the songs, because I love the songs, and I think Simon really brought that to the whole project. He really has excellent taste in that kind of music and a reverence for it that he wouldn't try to make something contemporary just to make it contemporary. He would try to find what is the essence of this song and this original record that we don't want to lose.
There's an element of that on the new record from the standpoint of you are experiencing this career resurgence. Even before the record came out, you did the Thundercat track, you're getting notice from a younger generation. It could have been, here's hip new Michael McDonald record on the new one, but instead you decided to go with what you knew.
Yeah, I felt, whatever I have to bring to this project, it can only be what I do best. And then the minute I step outside of that comfort zone, I'm more than likely not going to be of much use to this thing. And I didn't want that situation to get created by me or for me. Like I say, as soon as I knew Simon was on board, I knew we were probably in pretty good shape, because I knew what he was capable of as a producer, and I knew that he understood what a track kind of had to have to put a vocal over it. Because so many, newer contemporary things, it's not the vocals, they're not all that important. You know what I mean? They're just part of the...
It's ambiance almost.
Yeah, the ambiance of the wall of ambiance. And we come from a different era and a different school. I was only going to be able to sound, like anybody to a certain degree, and because in the era I grew up, if you sounded like somebody else, your career was over. And nowadays it's like a lot of the vocalists kind of emulate each other, it seems like.
When you're approached to do something like the Thundercat project, are you able to go with the flow?
Steve Bruner, we were listening to song ideas that he had started. There was any number of them that really spoke to me, and that one particularly kind of felt like something we could contribute to that was up our alley, more or less. There's a real power in his music that I really love, and especially live. I got to play with him live a couple times. And it's basically a power trio, his band.
He's one of those people, the first time you see him, it's like an alien. It's like this entirely unknown thing, and then the deeper you get into it, the clearer it becomes.
It's funny because it is so different and so fresh in so many ways, and yet it's so steeped in tradition. It very much has that funk fusion thing that's kind of out of this world, and yet has a deep root in what his systemically American music, jazz, R&B, funk, soul. It's just interesting to see somebody take it in that direction in the way he does and assemble chord progressions and songs.
The Yacht Rock stuff, even though it started off as parody, I think there's an earnest appreciation there for the music. I mean, is that a motivating factor in getting out there and trying something new?
Yeah. The guys in that genre, that new genre of R&B, like Thundercat.
Yeah. Solange is a fan.
Solange, all those artists.
Sort of hip-hop-y, acid jazz.
They all have this kind of daring that I like. They take, you can tell that they're looking backward and forward at the same time. I like that about an artist, where there seems to be a very progressive thing about something that's also very familiar. There's an old soul to it, but it's a whole new approach. That's what I like about those artists.
I have to imagine that after joining the Doobies, this was an established band. You were coming on, sort of doing your own thing within the broader context of the band. Any sort of self-doubt that you might have had at the time was probably amplified by this hit band that you were joining.
That was the dream gig of a lifetime.
Yeah.
I was just plucked out of obscurity.
You weren't that obscure.
I was at best a sideman.
Yeah.
The way that all came about, and the fact that I went on to stay with the band for a few years and actually become a member of the band, was a lot of twists and turns that were not foreseen by me. So I was just signing on for one tour, to kind of allow them to help them finish some dates until Tommy Johnston came back. And as it turns out, Tom didn't come back right away, and he actually went on to do a solo record during that period of time. Everything You Heard Is True is the title of it, but there were some great tunes on that record, some all-time great Tommy Johnston songs. And I think it's something he needed to do because it was a much more of an R&B record, I think, than even the stuff with the Doobies. In the context of the band, a lot of his stuff was very guitar-driven rock, very soulful, always on that border of R&B and rock. But I think his first solo record was kind of he was kind of set free to do something that was straight down the throat, kind of rhythm and blues. But what that did was that opened the door for me to kind of stick around with the band, and we worked together with the band, Tommy and I, and he came back and toured with us and played with us on a couple records. But there was something about the freedom, I think, of what he was experiencing at that point in his life. With Doobies, we always had a ridiculous touring schedule.
Yeah.
It was like, get him back on the road.
Musically, though, when you first joined up, did you feel like you were out of your comfort zone?
No, because I was just learning their songs, and so I didn't really think about it one way or the other than to make sure I knew the parts. And they gave me a bunch of leads to sing, and which I thought was great. I didn't normally get a chance to sing lead with most bands I worked for that were actually paying me money. Singing was something I did in my little bar gigs with buddies of mine. We all took a song or two. It was a lot of profile to have as a sideman to be able to sing a couple of their big hits and stuff. At least each night like that. And that worked its way into being more of a member of the band. And then all of a sudden we had an album to do. The producer had heard a demo of mine that I cut with Tyran Porter of a song I wrote, which I had no intention of playing for him or anybody, really. Ty and I were just having fun one night. I had dinner at his house, and he was showing me his new studio that he put together. And it was just like an 8-track studio, so we made this demo, The producer suggested we cut it as a band.
Did you not see yourself as being a songwriter, as performing your own stuff prior to that?
I did. I came to California to be a singer-songwriter, A lot of my stuff was pretty terrible, but I didn't know that then. I thought I wanted to be like B.J. Thomas. I loved Burt Bacharach's songs. To be a crooner would have been my greatest dream,
It's never too late, Michael.
Right, yeah. I've kind of worn it out a little bit too much for that now, but I did have eyes to be a solo artist when I came to California. I had a record deal. That's what got me out there. And it was a situation that really gave me a great experience because I didn't really do well as a new artist in a stable of artists of this producer who signed me, Rick Gerard. He was nice enough to hire me on all his recording dates, so I was playing on everybody that he produced, their sessions, doing overdubs or playing on the tracking dates. And it was a job I did not deserve. I didn't have any business being on the floor with the wrecking crew. But there I was, and he used me to write little arrangements for him to kind of formulate the tracks. And so that kind of facilitated me being there on the date. And I'd wind up playing keyboard on these tracks with Hal Blaine and
Carol Kay and
Jerry Sheff and James Burton and all these top-notch guys. That probably did more for me than anything else that happened to me during that period of time.
That was sort of like boot camp for you.
Yeah, it really was.
You have to get better when you're surrounded by greatness.
Oh, yeah. And those guys were very nice to me, but they also gave me real good guidance. It's like you don't want to be the first one to get to the bridge.
Yeah.
You know? So I learned to really play in a rhythm section with a lot more ability.
Do you learn about songwriting by playing with studio musicians?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, I think I always learned. That's why I always did a lot of background singing dates too, because I always loved that idea of being in on somebody's project before it was released as a record. You know, I always loved hearing what, you know, whoever's session we were singing on at the time, whether it was Jimmy Webb or Michael Jackson or whoever, to hear the stuff that they were working on in the moment. You know, we were usually the last overdubs that were getting done. So you could pretty much hear the tracks. They had already been cut, and most of the overdubs had been done, the backgrounds. And it was a nice kind of inside view of what was going on with this artist. And you learn a lot from that, you know, and you hear the tracks in a different way when you hear them before they're mixed, you know.
Do you feel like you could have been happy? I mean, had that been what you continue to do for your career if you were a studio musician, a backing musician?
Yeah, I think I would have been. I had a greater dream to become a studio musician than I did to become a recording artist. Because I did stop kind of writing for a while. I didn't start writing again till all of a sudden the opportunity with the Doobies presented itself. Then all of a sudden I started finishing songs that had been laying around for years.
So you've had this problem for a long time.
Yeah, you know, and I take a long time anyway. Yeah. I think the disappointment for me was to not ever really to know that I wasn't ever going to be good enough to be an A-list guy, you know. I was lucky.
In terms of a
studio first call kind of guy, you know. I was never one of those guys, never was going to be one of those guys. It was kind of like being an athlete that only had so much talent. You're not going to make it to the pro. So in terms of studio musicianship, you know, that was my dilemma, you know, or my fate. But I enjoyed it so much, and my dream in my back of my head was to be one of those guys, you know, and
you had to settle for being a famous singer.
Well, you know, I realized that probably more than likely I'm going to be that guy that goes on the road forever, and gets paid to be part of a band on the road. You know, you figure out where you fit in because you're looking to make a living at this. You know, and I enjoyed traveling when I was young. You know, I still enjoy it. You know,
when you get to this point when you're in LA working with the best studio musicians, and then you're working with the Doobies, you've got Kenny Loggins over here, you've got some of the best singers, songwriters of the era. How much are you actually driven by competition?
Always, yeah, always. I was always driven by competition. I always felt like competition was a good thing because it made me realize what there was to be accomplished, you know. Otherwise, you wouldn't know. You know, you would think, because I'm a creature of habit. I mean, I'd be happy to just know what I know and never worry about learning anymore. I need competition to kind of keep progressing. And I don't see it as competition in a bad way or that I have to win anything. I just have to understand that I got a long way to go before I'm as good as that guy. And that keeps me honest with myself, hopefully, which I also have a problem with. But don't we all? But I like it. I like being around. I've always felt that the only way I'm going to really progress, and in progression I find enjoyment, you know, with music. Really, it's a big component in still enjoying what I do. But I've always found that I always have to surround myself with players who are better than I am, you know, because then the whole experience means something different, you know, than it would if I was just kind of playing with guys who were kind of at my speed. And there's something about that. It doesn't work as well for anybody, really. It's kind of important to always kind of put yourself into a situation that is out of your comfort zone.
I assume that played a role in the new album. I mean, in a lot of ways, it is a really personal album, and you are dealing with some very difficult personal issues, again, after 17 years of not having put out an album of originals. Was it difficult to get out there and be that honest with yourself in front of a giant audience?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I don't think I was saying anything too incredibly revealing or anything, but I always kind of felt, and as a songwriter, I've always kind of sought to say things that I thought you could relate to.
There's issues of like substance abuse on here.
Sure,
I mean, that's some pretty personal stuff.
Yeah,
universal, but very personal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can only talk about that stuff from my own viewpoint. I can't offer anyone any advice where that's concerned because I spend a lot more time failing at that than succeeding. I wouldn't want to give anyone advice. You know, I just can only talk about my own experience. And that was one of, you know, finding that acceptance and surrender were the two most important things I could find that gave me any ability to succeed.
Surrender
to the truth, that I was.
To being honest with yourself.
Yeah, an addict, because up until that point, I was constantly in that head frame of, and getting more and more delusional with it. I got this. I'm better than this. I'm not one of those guys that can't deal with it.
You've been around long enough that you've seen a lot of people succumb to it.
I see guys all the time, every day, that deal with it the same way I did. And bottom line is, we all had that. The huge struggle was trying to prove that we got this.
Yeah.
I got control of it. I can. I'm not so pathetically unable to control myself that I can't get a handle on this. And the fact is that it was just the truth of the matter was that you can't.
We met your son on the way up here, and I know he's a songwriter, performer himself, and having been in the industry for as long as you have and really been put through the ringer over the years, did you try to dissuade him from going into the field at all?
No, not if I thought he had any chance of enjoying doing it as much as I have. Because, even after all these years, I find I'm on the road and I'll be in the back of the bus bouncing around. I'm 66 years old.
Yeah.
What in the fuck am I doing? Laying back here, bouncing around, grabbing the wall every time that he hits the rumble strip.
I don't know what your financial situation is, but I assume that you don't have to necessarily be touring all the time.
Oh, well, as long as my wife has a credit card, I'll be on the road. Trust me. But I think about it sometimes, like, shouldn't this be something that a part of my past?
I should be on a beach somewhere.
Or just have grown up. I feel like Peter Pan sometimes, But I realize, the bottom line, that's just part of how we try to perceive ourselves at any given moment, when the fact is what we really are is probably not that evident to us. And what I really am is a guy who just enjoys doing what I do.
And if people are coming out to see you, you must be doing something right.
Yeah, and I enjoy playing live with a band any day of the week. But I'll find myself questioning it, because I think I'm supposed to question it. When it's all
good
sudden,
to check yourself every so often.
Yeah, and then, but in the end, I just realized I just need to accept the fact that this is what I enjoy doing, and it doesn't have to be earth-shattering, or it doesn't have to be the biggest show in town.
You're from Ferguson originally. There is a song on the new record that I think does kind of play to some of those issues. Seeing what's been going on politically in the world, did that motivate you to sort of sit down and write a song addressing some of the issues?
Ferguson is a prime example, like so many of these things, of how little we communicate with each other, how we polarize before we ever give a subject any thought whatsoever.
It's so much easier to do now with social media.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And misinformation and all that bullshit. Ferguson, for instance, is a much nicer town than it was when I grew up in it. I mean, don't get me wrong. It was a great little town, in its own way, but it was post-war economy. Small towns were dying on the vine. The buses stopped running. It got to where there was no business downtown. Somebody was building a mall 10, 15 miles away that you had to drive to, where all the stores were. Ferguson back then was probably 99.9% white people. But today, it's a much more diverse town. And downtown Ferguson is like microbreweries and wine. Buddies that I grew up with are actually playing in downtown Ferguson. We never dreamed of playing. We played at one club in Ferguson, the Castaway, which was out by the airport. And it was probably the only nightclub that ever existed in Ferguson. It was a very economically unfulfilled place. If you listen to the news, or if you listen to the rhetoric around the whole subject of Ferguson, you'd think it was a hellhole. But it's not. My house looks a hell of a lot better than it did when we lived there. And the town really has not changed that much to the eye. If we really just listened to what each other is actually saying and not assumed that each other means something else, we'd do a lot better. When people say Black Lives Matter, no one is saying white lives don't matter. And to watch the way we don't see the elephant sitting in the living room, and we discuss around at things and make arguments out of things that aren't even really the argument. Do I really give a shit what Omarosa thinks of Donald Trump? What I really care about is, why did Donald Trump hire Omarosa to be one of the senior cabinet members in his administration in the first place? Isn't that really more telling than anything else? I mean, nothing against the woman, but she has no business being, anyone's aide or advisor to any president.
No less than Donald Trump necessarily has
to be president. Absolutely. Well, my point exactly. Yeah. Here's a guy that during a presidential debate wasted precious minutes of a national presidential debate to air his resentment for Rosie O'Donnell. Really? Am I the only one noticing this?
Since you still have a platform, you felt that it was important to discuss that on record.
Well, I don't know that I discussed that particularly on record.
No,
but yeah. I mean, I feel like that it's important that we understand the conversation we're actually having, and that if we're going to have the conversation, we actually really need to listen to each other, not just talk over each other with rhetoric that is only very one-sided. Our rhetoric at this point is getting so one-sided that we're actually, in America, being a racist has become like a valid argument again. There's no fucking valid argument there. It's wrong, period. You know, I saw a guy wearing a hat the other day go, make racism wrong again. I thought that just says it all, you know. I mean, that's where we're at.
We thought we won that fight.
Yeah, no, I mean, we thought we came to an understanding about this, you know. But here we are again. Hopefully we'll snap out of this, whatever this din is. Because before we become the next biggest satellite of the new Soviet Union, and then, you know, people in America, for all their patriotism, have to start getting used to the standard of living that most working class Russians and North Koreans enjoy. I think it's time we kind of snap out of it and realize who this guy is and what he is. He's not looking to be one of the 1% of America. He's looking to be one of the 0.1% of the Russian oligarchy. You know, he wants to be one of those boys, you know. And if he has to turn this country over to him, so be it. But that's what he wants. He didn't give a shit about making America great again or anything else. And I think we need to understand that, you know, before we proceed on making arguments about. One woman said to me the other day, she goes, well, you know, you liberals, you know, you have such a problem with all this stuff and Russian investigation. She goes, what about these priests? And I said, you know, I don't think anybody disagrees that that's an abomination.
I could be against two things at once.
There's not 25% of the population going, hey, these guys are men of God, leave them alone. We all kind of agree that's wrong. You know, how there can be any percentage of Americans who are watching this bullshit go down and go, oh, well, you know, he's doing a good job, you know, is beyond any normal logic. I mean, this guy could grab a toddler, skin it alive, and eat it on camera, and they'd still make some argument for his, you know, virtues.
There you go. That was the legendary Michael McDonald of course, the Doobie Brothers and Steely Dan, and an amazing solo career, and all the awesome duets he's done over the years. What an absolute honor it was to speak to him. And at the end of that conversation, I was really wishing that I had opened with the question about Trump, but an amazing conversation nonetheless. He's got a new Christmas album coming out in the next couple of weeks called Season of Peace. Thanks again so much to him. Thanks to Joe and Samantha at Saxco for helping set that up. That's a conversation that I've been trying to set up for a very long time. The same company reps him as Emily Haynes of Stars, and I found that out, and I've essentially been bugging their PR reps since then about getting him on the show. Really glad we were able to do it for episode 300. We've been doing the show for about 5 years and change, and I can't thank everyone enough. All of those folks who have supported us over the years, folks at Boing Boing for helping us get off the ground, to Geneva and Brian for the production help that they've given us over the years. Every single person who's ever liked and rated and reviewed the show and told a friend. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this has been the most rewarding thing that I've done in my career over the years, these 300 shows. So thanks again to you guys, and we've got a lot of shows coming up in the near future. There's a lot of RIYL already in the can, so look forward to that. Again, if you like this show, please support us by rating and reviewing us on iTunes or Google Podcasts. We're on Spotify now. Like us on Facebook. If you have any feedback, it's rwellcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Tumblr. That's rwellcast.tumblr.com. Thanks, and I guess we will see you again next week with episode 301 of RIYL.